I'm Michael Connick, and this is the story behind my stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Doctorow,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Michael Connick.
I'd like to thank some sponsors who, due to their generous support of the show, help bring this to you each and every time we bring you the show. From Eamon Ambrose, author of the best-selling sci-fi serial 0 Hour, comes a new novelette, Love and Other Algorithms. When Frank, a personal robot assistant, meets a similar model named Shelley, they are inexplicably linked and form an instant bond. But when outside forces conspire to separate them, Frank must decide how far he will go to save their relationship. However, all is not as it seems, and as Frank searches for Shelley, he learns that they are both part of something much, much bigger. Out now from Amazon, Love and Other Algorithms by Eamon Ambrose. Hey authors, are you looking for a beautiful professional cover for your science fiction or fantasy book? Holly Heisey Designs offers custom illustration and cover design with characters that will put your people center stage, spaceships designed from the ground up and scenery that makes your world come alive. Visit Holly Heisey Design to book a custom cover or view pre-made ebook covers ready to purchase. Holly is an award-winning illustrator and designer who's done work for the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, the Future Chronicles anthology series, and USA Today and Amazon.com best-selling authors. Holly will bring your story world to life and get you a cover that will help sell your book. Visit hollyheiseydesign.com for more information on how to book your custom cover design or purchase pre-mades, as well as join the Holly Heisey Design Facebook group for discounts and first dibs at all the new spaceship and fantasy pre-made covers. Find all of this at hollyheiseydesign.com. A Bright Shore, The Eden Chronicles, Book 1 by S.M. Anderson, a military sci-fi political thriller set just a short decade from now in 2031, holding to the concept of individual liberty can get you killed. Western civilization is in collapse, a process led and driven by the world's leading supposed democracies, our own included. What was once the Western world's guiding light of liberty is quickly being replaced by state-sponsored serfdom under the guise of a global economic reset done in the name of the workers. This is an exciting new novel by an exciting new talent, a debut novel, the first in a series from a former CIA operations officer who has decided that his lifelong writing habit, hobby, obsession is more fun than real work. Go pick up a copy today of A Bright Shore, The Eden Chronicles, Book 1 by S.M. Anderson. There's a link to all of our great sponsors in the show notes at hankgarner.com. Stick around at the end of our excellent interview today for an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. As always, thanks for listening. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have my new friend Michael Connick on the show with me. Michael is the author of a brand new book called Funhouse Mirrors, and his books are thrillers that have you right in the seat of action from page one. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Well, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you taking time to come on the show. You know, because you've listened to the show before, that we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
Well, my first memory is really as a kid. First of all, I've always been a voracious reader. I was actually kind of an insecure and very shy child. In fact, it's my theory that I think most writers have been insecure and shy children. So books were my friends, and so I loved getting involved in the stories that they told. And I remember in elementary school, I had a good friend who also was a big reader, and we used to basically tell each other of the stories that we had just read. But what I would do is I would actually enhance the stories. I would modify them a little bit, make them more interesting, make some improvements on them, and basically tell a verbal version of the story based upon what I had read, but greatly extended from there.
What kinds of stories did you love when you were a kid?
Science fiction stories. I used to go to our local library and check out basically every single science fiction book they had.
I love that. Was there any particular kind? Did you like space adventures? Were there?
Yeah.
Like what was the thing that really resonated with you?
Well, I liked the work of Robert Heinlein. I loved Starship Troopers.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, basically anything having to do with space.
Heinlein for a lot of us was really our entry to science fiction. I know he was for me. With Half Spacesuit Will Travel, and then you graduate to Starship Troopers and some more serious endeavors. I think it's been a serious cultural touchstone for a lot of us writers.
Absolutely, yeah. I also really enjoyed Jerry Pournelle's work and Larry Niven.
Oh, absolutely. I one of my proudest moments in the podcast was getting to sit down with Jerry Pournelle just a few months before he passed away and record an interview with him. And that's, I still think with great affection, one of my favorite things about getting to do this podcast so far. So what did you decide to do? You loved books and the idea of writing, but did you ever see yourself as a published writer when you were growing up?
No. Well, actually, yes and no. The problem was I went to college, and I took a creative writing course, and I got a C- in that course. So that pretty much, that was it for me. I was doomed. I was never going to be a writer. And it really, it went right off the table. But then, of course, I started my career when I graduated from college, and I ended up working for the government. I ended up working with the intelligence community. And one of the things you do in the intelligence community is you do a lot of writing, basically all kinds of reports. And the result of which is I actually started to have to write a lot, and my writing, first of all, got critiqued, but then it got better. And then pretty soon I started becoming comfortable in doing that kind of writing. And when I left the intelligence community, I worked for DOD for a while, and then eventually I got out of classified work and I became a management consultant where you have to tell stories. You go to a firm that's in trouble. All the employees are trapped in this horrible swamp in the darkness, and you have to give them a vision of how we're all going to walk out of this swamp into a new land of sunshine and sweet smelling flowers and blue skies. And so I got very good at crafting stories to motivate people to get them out of the swamp. And it also became a pretty good speaker. Then I got a very interesting, assignment. I actually worked at Bell Labs for 2.5 years as an instructor, putting together technical training courses for their internal staff, and traveled all around the country teaching. That was a tremendous experience in learning to be, again, a good crafter of story, a good way of learning the most effective way to get your ideas across to people. And then eventually what happened is, back in 2001, I picked up this book by Stephen King called On Writing, which I think you've probably heard of.
Yeah, I think I ran across it once.
Yes. And I read it, and he sort of took away the scariness of the idea of writing fiction. And one of the things, it's been such a long time since I've read that book, I may have false memories about it at this point, but I remember specifically that there was an exercise to do in there where basically you had to write a short story. And so I don't even remember what the plot was, but I sat down and I wrote this story, and I read it, and I said, this is good. This is really good. So writing then got to be basically put on my bucket list. And I said, when I retire, I am going to write a novel. just for fun. I had no intention of publishing a novel. I just want to go through the experience of writing a novel. And so that's what I did. I retired in 2014, and in 2015, every year my wife and family go to the beach, to the Outer Banks in North Carolina, and we rent a huge house, and we fill it with kids and their spouses and grandchildren, and we have just a really good time for a whole week. Well, that in 2015, I said, okay, now's the time. I've been saying for a year I'm going to write a novel. Let me do it. So I had a MacBook Air with me, and I sat down, and in a week I wrote the first 10,000 words of my first novel, and I've sort of never looked back from there.
Oh, what a feeling of accomplishment when you sit down and then you kind of take a break and look back and think, wow, this thing is really underway. Like, I've actually created characters and put them in situations, and this is actually going somewhere.
Oh, absolutely. It's I'm very much of a pantser, so I had no idea. The first novel was actually very easy for me to write and didn't require really any research, at least not for the first part of it, because it's very autobiographical. It's about a guy just like me who grew up in San Francisco, just like me, who goes from college into the intelligence community, who goes to Iran and acts as a consultant to the Shah's government and their secret police, and so on. That was my first novel. It was basically a sort of a fictionalized autobiography. But the thing that I found most interesting about writing was that I love it, and it's easy for me. The concept of writer's block is not in my brain. I never am intimidated by a blank screen or a blank page. I just can write, and like I said, I'm very much of a pantser. I had no idea how my first novel was going to end. Characters appeared in it that I had no idea were going to be there, and it took on a life of their own, and so on. And that's the way I've been writing ever since.
You mentioned earlier, Michael, that when you were in the intelligence community that you started writing more and writing lots of reports and getting critiqued, and that your writing got better. What do you think? How do you think that experience and going through the kind of rote practice of writing reports, and what most of us probably think of as very dry writing and not fun. But there a lot of times, a lot of reports will have a narrative section, and you really need to bring in all of the information and make it presentable so that people don't fall asleep when they're reading it. In your writing fiction now, do you look back on that time and see that that there were skills that you picked up that you're still drawing from now?
Absolutely. When you're writing a report for a government bureaucrat, or you're writing a report for a business client, the whole thing is to be able to effectively communicate a vision, ideas, a desired outcome to them, and those are great skills that translate directly into writing fiction. And really more than anything else, one of the things that I often run into with new writers. I belong to a local writing group, and we have some people who are just starting to write. It was asked the same question, which is, how do I become a writer? And I always tell them the same thing: you have to write a lot. Was it Jerry Pournelle who said you have to write? To become a writer, you have to write 100,000 words, throw it away, and then actually start writing your real work.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. That exercise that you started on vacation with your family, that you had the first 10,000 words, that would go on to become Trapped in a Hall of Mirrors. Is that right?
That's correct. So I wrapped that in.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, yeah. So I ended up. Took me about 3 or 4 more months to finish it. It ended up to be about 68,000 words. And then, of course, that was the first draft, and then I went through months of rereading it and revising it and rereading it and revising it and rereading and revising it until I got sick of it, and then I said, okay, I'm done revising it.
When you said it was a sort of a fictionalized autobiography of you and your experiences, how did you? Because you are obviously still living and still experiencing things, and how did you decide where to begin and where to end what you were going to the story you were going to tell? So I guess what I'm asking is, did you visualize the story ahead of time and think this is the kind of narrative that I want to tell? This is the story of this particular incident, and since it was your first kind of outing, and hadn't done it before, did you know where the story was going from the beginning?
No, I had no idea how it was going to end. I knew how it was going to go about halfway through. Again, my career with the intelligence community is I started off working in the U.S. and then in a technical role, and then I ended up going to Iran and working over there for a few years. Got into some crazy situation, which is described in the book, and then ended up coming back to the U.S. and went in. And then about a year later, I ended up going to Vienna, Austria, and that would have been in the early 1980s when Vienna was the spy capital of Europe, and actually had a fairly boring assignment there. So that's where the book had to change. If I just continued to make this kind of an autobiography, it would have been a very boring book at that point. I would have lost all my readers. So at that point, I decided, well, I need to jazz up the story. It needs to be a real spy thriller. So that's when characters started appearing out of nowhere. And again, I really actually didn't know how it would end until I actually wrote it. So and it all basically came together. It's kind of an amazing experience. I forget, I think it was C.S. Lewis who said, I don't make books, I just take dictation, from my muse. And I kind of do that. That's how I write.
I like that. When you finished the book, and did you, because you said that you didn't even really think about publishing in the beginning, you just wanted the experience of writing a novel. Well, when you got finished and you look back on it and you say, well, this is actually pretty good. I bet some people would like to read this. Did you?
Well, actually, no. It didn't quite work that way. What I did is I gave it to my wife. My wife is an extremely critical reader. She has very little patience with books that she doesn't like. She will she will put down a book without finishing it if she doesn't like it. And she also has a tendency to skip over parts that she thinks are dull. Well, she read my book and she said, I didn't skip a single paragraph and I couldn't put it down until I was done with it. You have to get this book published. And then I said to her, no, I don't have any intention of doing that. I just wanted to write a novel. This is really cool that you think it's good. But, do you know what it will take to publish a novel? No, it's going to be too much work. I'm retired now. I don't want to do that.
Oh, I love that. So what did you start then researching, publishing, and how did you decide to get the book out?
Well, what happened is, she then turned it around and started giving it to more people, and gave it to more people so that I would get encouragement. And so I got all this encouragement. So finally I said, okay, I will publish this bloody thing. So what's the first thing you do? You go on to Google and you find, you put in how do you publish a book, and so the first thing I decided I needed to do is I needed to get an agent, and then I had to learn about query letters and so on and how all this stuff is formatted. And so I went ahead and did that, and I sent out to about 100 agents. I sent out a nice letter with sampled material from the book and the synopsis and all the things they require. And I got back queries I sent out. I think I got back 8 responses, and most of those were actually, they were, hey, this sounds like a really good book. Like to this book right now. So the next step then was a little independent publisher that doesn't deal with agents. So I found some publishers that are in the neighborhood that I live, And I kind of got the same thing. It was like, yeah, this is really good.
You came back from the ether. Okay.
Okay.
So you were looking at independent publishers that would help with the process.
Correct. That didn't require that you had an agent.
Okay.
And so what happened is, again, it ended up to be a very time-wasting thing. I got lots of encouragement, but nobody ever was ready to sign a contract right now. Eventually I said, well, the heck with it. So I'm going to find out how to publish. Now, I'm actually retired, and I'm, financially comfortable, so didn't really need to do this for money. So I actually made it a project to see if I could get a book published by CreateSpace at zero cost to me, with no outlay whatsoever. And I discovered that you can actually do that if you're willing to design the cover, if you're willing to do all the formatting, if you can arrange to have people actually proof your, at least copy edit your book, proofread it, and so on, who will do it for free. And I found people that were willing to do that. So my first book was published through CreateSpace at zero cost to me, and by golly, it started to sell.
I'm a big fan of bootstrapping and doing things yourself. And I think there definitely comes a point where you need to hire people to help. And especially if you start having some success and things, maybe your time is best spent writing and not doing all the other stuff. But I'm a big fan of at least learning how to do everything yourself. And that way, you know what goes into it, and the entire process, and you never get lost in the process because you understand everything.
Absolutely, and the other thing is you have to be lucky, and I was incredibly lucky. Just a whole series of happenstances came about. The first one I decided, okay, I need to market my book now, so I need to write a press release, and I need to send a press release out to all the local newspapers and all the magazines and all the radio stations and all the television stations. Now, I've talked to many, many, many writers who have done exactly the same thing that I've just described and got zero response. Well, I ended up getting a response within 2 hours from a local television station saying, hey, we would be very interested in having you appear on the noon news and the 11 o'clock news. We would like to interview you as a local author. And that was amazing, and can you be here tomorrow? So that was a huge break. I also, I found my local writers group and got involved in going to book fairs and book shows, and pretty much soon the word got out. And then I also, started sending out my book to various review sites on the internet. And strangely enough, my books seemed to be very popular in Europe because a lot of European review sites picked up on doing reviews. And I probably sell just as many books of my book on the German Amazon site and the UK Amazon site as I do on the US Amazon site. Wow.
Why do you think that is? What do you think about your stories resonates with the European audience?
Well, they're Cold War novels. They take basically the first two take place at least partially in Europe, in Vienna, in Vienna, Austria. I'm a bug on authenticity, and so I go to extraordinary lengths to make sure that there are no mistakes in my book, that everything in them is very, very accurate. So but it's easy to do if you've lived in Vienna for 3 years to talk about what Vienna was like. So the first book takes place, half of it takes place in Vienna, and then the second book, Funhouse Mirrors, takes place primarily in Vienna and in the United States. And so there's a lot of, I tried to bring in a lot of local color. Vienna was a fascinating place in the 1980s. Again, it was an interesting, Austria is an interesting country at that time because they were officially neutral. They weren't a member of NATO, and they were right on the border with the Iron Curtain. And so they would allow the Iron Curtain nations would allow a lot of their nationals to travel to Austria if they had hard currency to buy things that they couldn't get anywhere else. So there was this constant ebb and flow of people in from both sides, from NATO and from the Iron Curtain, sort of mixing around in Vienna. In fact, there was a joke going around in Vienna that there were more spies in Vienna than there were members of the Austrian army.
After that book, you wrote a second book, Funhouse Mirrors. What was the motivation for following up that first book? Did you immediately start coming up with story ideas and think, well, this was so much fun, why don't we do it again?
Actually, the opposite. Every time I write a novel, I always say, this is the last time I'm ever going to do this. This is just too darn much work. But And I say that for months, and then eventually an idea pops in my head, and I think, boy, I left Stephen Connor, my protagonist, sort of. Actually, the very first book, it actually ends with Stephen Connor is retiring and moving to Huntington, West Virginia, where I live. So I'm thinking, well, it's kind of done. This character's done. But then I figured, well, wait a minute. I sort of also left him in between, where he's wrapping. He's only 1 year into a 3-year assignment in Vienna, so it would be kind of interesting to talk about what he does for those 2 years. And so, lo and behold, I got the idea, I started writing, and another novel popped out.
It's funny how that happens, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. And the other thing was, I think it was a better novel than the first novel. I mean, the first novel has gotten really good reviews and so on, but again, the best way to learn how to write is to write. And, I think my latest book is better than those previous two books in many ways. I've learned more about the craft, and I've started a brand new novel right now that I'm writing, as we speak. I'm 20,000 words into it, and I think I'm very critical of my own work. And so it's rare for me to look at my own writing and say, wow, this is really good. Well, I'm getting to the point now where I can actually say that honestly.
Well, you learn more about the craft each time. You learn more about your characters, and I think you learn more about yourself in the writing. And each time I write something new, it's a growth experience for me. And I look back and I think, wow, that was really great. I did so much better as a writer this time.
Yeah, well, among other things, I've learned to show, not tell, much more. And just little techniques like that. The other thing is I keep fooling around with the structure of my works. Like the first 3 novels have fairly short chapters. The novel I'm working on right now, which is a complete break from the tradition of the spy novel, it's actually going to be a police procedural mystery novel. It has very long chapters. The chapters are between 5,000 and 6,000 words long, and it's organized in a different way. And it's taking a whole new approach to organizing a novel has almost become like a game for me. It's like, okay, I want to do something different. I want to try it out.
Yeah, and that's kind of where the magic happens sometimes, in trying something new, and it's kind of like taking a situation and looking at it from different angles, and you just never know what's going to come out. So yeah, I'm all for mixing it up and trying new things. Some really cool stuff comes out of that.
Absolutely. Well, my current novel, the first chapter, since it was right around 5,000 words in length and sort of stood alone as a complete story, I realized I had written my first short story. I've never written a short story before, so I actually submitted it to the West Virginia Writers Annual Contest in the mystery category as a short story. So that was kind of an interesting happenstance that's come out of the writing.
I love that. That's fantastic. Your newest book that's out now is called Afghan Mirrors. There's a
Correct.
theme. There's a theme running your work. Trapped in a Hall of Mirrors, Funhouse Mirrors, and Afghan Mirrors. What is your obsession with mirrors, Michael?
It just happened. it's a way to have a thread to tie everything together. Actually, the first one was easy, Trapped in a Hall of Mirrors, because that's how I felt like that's what I felt like it was to work in the intelligence community, because you see all these distorted visions, all this strange information, and even reflections back of what you're doing to yourself, but somehow it's all the mirrors are fractured, the information is incomplete, and so on. So that became natural. And then, of course, Funhouse Mirrors was a way of moving that same idea ahead. When I decided to write my third novel, which takes place in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and is the first novel I wrote that's completely been to Pakistan. I've never been to Afghanistan, and it centers around the Soviet-Afghan War. I had to somehow figure out mirrors. Well, it ends up that in Afghanistan, a traditional dress for women who are attending a wedding or a wedding feast is actually a dress that's covered with small mirrors. And so I said, aha, I've got my mirrors.
Because you couldn't break tradition at this point.
Exactly.
So what does your protagonist get up to in Afghan Mirrors? Well,
he gets, basically, the Soviet-Afghan War is in full, is fully involved. The Soviets are fully involved in the Soviet-Afghan War. And so he is sent, first of all, to Pakistan, because Pakistan is the support base for the Mujahideen. The CIA basically funneled all their aid through Pakistan. It was actually ended up being distributed by the Pakistan ISI, the Pakistan Intelligence Service. So he goes to Pakistan, and he's basically sent there by Langley to figure out if the aid that's going to Pakistan is actually ending up in the Mujahideen's hands, and if there's anything that needs to be changed, if the Mujahideen are being treated fairly by the Pakistani ISI, and so on. And while he's there, he ends up getting an invitation to go into Afghanistan by one of the Mujahideen leaders, and he thinks to himself, well, this is how to really find out what's going on, is to actually go there. But there is a very clear prohibition against any CIA officers actually going into Afghanistan, because the CIA was desperately, was very afraid that they'd end up being captured by the Russians. So anyway, he goes ahead and does it anyway, and he has quite a series of adventures in Afghanistan. Actually gets involved in a firefight between his little group and the Soviet army. And he also, in this book, also encounters the first big romance of his life. He falls in love with a red-haired female CIA agent named Jo, J-O, and he starts thinking about, maybe it's time for me to leave the CIA and settle down and get married. And this is what it's like to be in love. So it's got a lot going on in it. In fact, it's interesting because I actually was, again, since I am the luckiest author in the world, I actually got contacted by a screenwriter in New York City who has read my works and says, hey, I'm interested in doing a spec script on Afghan Mirrors because it's the first book you've ever written that has romance in it, and Hollywood demands romance. And so, would you be willing to basically make a deal with me on a spec script? He said, I think I can sell it to probably as a made-for-TV movie, or to one of the streaming services like Netflix or Hulu or and so on. I'd say, sure, that sounds great.
Awesome. So the third book is out now. And you said you're working on a police procedural now. Is this the end? Is this the end for Stephen Connor, or
this is yes? It is a trilogy, and this is the third book. Ergo, that's the end.
Nice. So when you decided to shift gears toward the police procedural, was it difficult picking up new characters and just really thinking, because you've spent so long with these characters, how was that shifting gears to something completely different?
Well, again, I write from experience, and I've been very actively involved in the firearms community most of my life. I actually while I was working with the intelligence community, again, I get into kind of a sticky situation in Iran, and I actually ended up getting trained in using a firearm for my own self-protection. And so I've basically, been working with firearms for 35 years, including doing a lot of competitions. I actually shoot in what are called action pistol matches. And these are, as the word implies, these are not just standing shooting at bullseye targets. These are matches where you actually have to run around, engage multiple targets, shoot from awkward positions, shoot around barricades, and so on. And a lot of police officers compete in this kind of shooting. So I've met a lot of police officers, and police officers love to tell stories. And I love stories. I love to listen to them, and they've told me some incredible stories. The other thing that's sort of an interesting, situation for me to be in is I live in Huntington, West Virginia. And Huntington, West Virginia is, in the sort of almost the capital of the opioid crisis. So this small college town that I live in is sort of coming to terms with a lot of serious crime issues, a lot of serious addiction issues, and so on. The police force is very overwhelmed. In fact, it got so bad that the governor actually called in the National Guard to assist the Huntington Police Department. They were becoming so overwhelmed. So you can see this is the start of some really great stories.
I bet that's gonna, ripped right from the headlines, makes for very compelling reading and very difficult writing at the same time, because you with things happening and you want to get details right. I'm really excited to see what you do with it, Michael.
Well, thank you. And again, because I'm so big into authenticity, I'm actually working with a lot of the local police officers. It's interesting. Some of the stories are so outrageous that they tell me that I feel like I can't even put them into a novel because no one would believe them. Let me tell you a real brief example. A local police officer, he's actually from Ironton, Ohio, tells me one day he gets a call saying there's been a stabbing. So he goes to this location. The only thing he sees a man sitting on a curb playing with his telephone. And he sort of notices the guy has like a kind of a weird hat on. And so he's looking around for signs of a fight or blood or whatever. So finally he looks down at the guy and he says, "Hey, I just got a call for somebody who got stabbed or cut or something. Do you know anything about that?" And the guy looks up at him and says, "Well, that would probably be me." And then now Chad suddenly notices that there's a hatchet. It's stuck in the man's head, right in the center of his head. And he's just sitting there, playing with his phone, like nothing's happened. So if I put that in my book, no one would ever believe it.
Oh, truth is stranger than fiction, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's great. Michael, I can't wait to see how that book's going to turn out. I know it's going to be awesome. We're going to send everybody to pick up a copy of Afghan Mirrors and the first two also in the Stephen Connor trilogy. Where can people find you online if they're just learning about you and want to dig in more to these spy action thrillers?
Okay, well, my books are sold by Amazon, so I have an Amazon authors page. I also have a website, which is basically my first and last name, just concatenated together without any dots or dashes or anything. So it would be michaelconnick.com. So that would be michaelconnick.com. And if you go there, if you do read the novels, you'll actually see that there are some pages that have pictures of some of the scenes from some of the books to sort of give you a little extra bit of enjoyment about the stories. And my books are also available through Barnes and Noble and Books A Million websites and so on. So they should be easy to find.
Excellent. Michael, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate you inviting me to your show, and I really enjoy your show. I actually started listening to it a long time ago when you interviewed Brad Thor, because I've actually been a fan of his work. So you've had many great episodes that I've enjoyed very much, and now I too am famous.
That's right. That's right. Now we can say we all know Michael Connick as well.
Exactly.
Well, Michael, we wish you much luck, brother. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
And thank you again for inviting me.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
His body broke free of its paralysis, and he stumbled forward, losing his balance. He fell down the slope towards the spot where they had been. His hand shot out unthinkingly, and he grabbed the corner of the black stone bridge. Hoofbeats. Pounding hoofbeats. Coming closer. Coming up the road. Someone or something galloped towards him. The head of an emaciated horse burst from the gloom of the road. The rider was fumbling, out of control, without saddle or bridle, clutching at the white mane, kicking the beast across the hindquarters with his thin legs, his face a frozen mask of terror. He whipped around to look back over his shoulder. Something chased him. Something terrible. Jason spun away as the horse ran over him, spearing him through the chest with its iron-shod hooves. He was unhurt. The horse galloped upward and across the bridge, across strong timbers, rough-hewn and knot-holed. The rider wheeled the horse about, looking back from the far shore. He was wheezing. A sloppy white ruffle bobbed under his chin. His face was hopeful now. A familiar face, much like the one Jason saw every morning in the mirror. Something thundered up behind Jason, not with a clatter of hoofbeats, but with the teeth-rattling thunder of stone on stone. Ichabod, yes, of course, the man was Ichabod, wailed, and the sound of his terror echoed across the valley. The hot breath of a horse burned the back of Jason's neck. He stood frozen, unable to turn his head to see the thing behind him. He didn't want to. This was no ordinary vision. He felt with certainty that the rider behind him, no, the horseman behind him, knew he was there. Ichabod kicked his horse. It reared, brayed, and would have thrown him but for the fistfuls of its mane he clutched. Horse and rider spun in place on the far side of the bridge, disoriented. The horseman behind Jason laughed, a terrible, deep, cracking sound from all directions like 1,000 axes chopping down the woods. Jason felt searing heat as a ball of flame whipped over his shoulder. A burning jack-o'-lantern arced across the bridge. Its maniacal face spun end over end. It grinned back at Jason for an instant, spun around and crashed into Ichabod's temple, knocking him from his horse and into the dust. The pumpkin careened upwards, exploding against the trees, shooting tendrils of flame up their trunks, igniting branches and showering the world with sparks and flaming leaves. Jason recoiled, fell to his knees, and threw his arms over his face. His lungs and heart pumped wildly. They slowed. He brought his arms down. The bridge was broken again. It was over.